The phone rings. And before the thought arrives, before there's been any conscious assessment of capacity, of timing, of whether this is a good moment, the hand is already moving. Not because they want to answer, not because they've decided to, because not answering is, in some place that sits beneath decision-making, simply not an option. It has never been an option. And the question of whether it should be has never had the space to form. This is what it feels like to have been raised to be available, not to have chosen it, not to have developed toward it through some combination of temperament and experience, to have been shaped into it, systematically, in an environment where availability was not a preference but a condition. The condition of belonging, the condition of being valued, the condition, in the deepest sense, of being considered a worthwhile presence in the family structure. And when you're raised to be available, a very specific thing happens to the development of the self. The part of you that was supposed to be learning what you want, what you enjoy, what you need, who you are when no one is asking anything of you, that part was given a different assignment. That part was assigned to the system. And the system always had something it needed. So the question, who am I, never quite got answered. Because the more pressing question was always, what does the system need? And that question, asked enough times, in enough contexts at enough formative moments, becomes the architecture of a person. Murray Bowen at Georgetown University, whose foundational work in family systems theory transformed how psychologists understand family dynamics, described a concept he called differentiation of self, the degree to which a person can maintain a distinct identity while remaining in emotional contact with others. In highly differentiated individuals, there's a clear internal sense of self that remains stable regardless of what the relational system needs from them in a given moment. In less differentiated individuals, and Bowen documented this with unusual precision across generations, the identity becomes fused with the role. What I do for others becomes what I am. My function in the system becomes myself. Children raised to be available often grow into adults with very low differentiation in this sense. Not because they're weak or undeveloped, because the environment never created conditions for anything else. The family needed something, and they were available to provide it. Children who grow up too fast don't usually know that's what happened. They just know that one day, being small and needing things felt dangerous, and being capable felt safe. If that child sounds familiar, I've written about where that leads, what it costs in adulthood, and what changes when you finally understand it. Link in the description. And in the first pinned comment, Salvador Minachin, the psychiatrist whose structural family therapy became one of the most widely practiced frameworks in clinical psychology, described a related pattern he called enmeshment, a family structure characterized by diffuse boundaries between members, where individual identity and family function become difficult to separate. In enmeshed family systems, the child's emotional and practical availability isn't experienced as a demand. It's experienced as love, as closeness, as how the family works. And children who grow up inside that structure often don't have language for what was asked of them because what was asked of them felt, from the inside, like simply being part of a family. The costs are invisible precisely because the framework that produced them made them look like belonging. What the child was actually learning, in these environments, was something more specific than helpfulness. They were learning that their availability, their presence, their responsiveness, their perpetual readiness to meet the system's needs, was the primary currency of relational worth. Not who they were, what they did, how reliably they showed up, how quickly they answered. And that lesson travels. Sheldon Stryker at Indiana University, whose work on role identity theory explored how internalized roles shape behavior and self-concept, documented something that appears throughout this pattern. When a role, the available one, the reliable one, the one the family can count on, is inhabited consistently over a long enough period, it stops being experienced as a role and starts being experienced as an identity. The distinction between I am playing a role and this is who I am collapses. And when the role is also the condition of belonging, when not playing it produces relational consequences, the collapse happens faster and more completely. By the time the person who is raised to be available reaches adulthood, they often can't locate the self that exists outside the availability. Not because that self doesn't exist, because it was never fully developed, The conditions for its development, solitude without guilt, rest without obligation, the experience of being wanted for no functional reason, were rarely present in the environment that was supposed to create them. And this produces a specific kind of adult life. They don't know how to be off-duty. Not conceptually off-duty, they know the concept of rest, of boundaries, of saying no. They've probably read about it. They may even tell others to do it. But in the body, in the actual experience of being unreachable, of not answering, of taking time that is genuinely theirs and no one else's, something arrives that feels like violation. A deep, pre-verbal wrongness. Guilt that is not proportionate to anything they've actually done. The specific anxiety of a system that has been trained to always be on suddenly being asked to turn off. And there's something else, something you feel but can't always explain, that makes this pattern particularly difficult to interrupt. The availability has often produced real connection, real belonging, real love, even imperfect, conditional, but real. The people in their life depend on them, need them, reach for them. And the part of them that was raised to equate availability with worth can't easily distinguish that love from the dependence. Can't always see where genuine connection ends and function begins. So, dismantling the availability feels, from the inside, like dismantling the relationship, like stepping back from the only way they know how to be close. But here's what almost nobody tells the person who is raised to be available. The availability is not who they are. It's what they were shaped to be. Those are not the same thing. And the part of them that exists beneath the function, that has preferences that have never been developed, that wants things for no instrumental reason, that would rest if rest were ever allowed to feel safe, that part is still there. Underdeveloped. Quiet. But present. Developing it doesn't require dismantling the generosity, which in many cases is genuine. It requires something more specific. The experience, repeated enough times to begin to feel possible, of being unavailable, and discovering that the relationship survives it, that the love doesn't withdraw when the function pauses, that the belonging, when it's real, is not contingent on the service. That discovery, which sounds small, is the one the original environment never allowed them to make. And it's worth naming why the original environment couldn't allow it. Not because it was cruel. Not because anyone decided that this child's sense of self was expendable. But because in highly enmeshed or parentified family systems, everyone is organized around a shared architecture. The child's availability isn't experienced as a demand, it's experienced as the way the family functions. As normal, as love, even. And within that architecture, testing the availability, being unavailable, taking time that isn't in service of someone else, discovering whether the belonging survives the function would have felt, and often would have been, genuinely disruptive. The family needed the function, and the function was provided by the child who had been most successfully shaped to provide it. So the experiment was never run. Not because it was forbidden, because the conditions never created enough safety to attempt it. Those conditions can be created now. Not in the original family, that architecture doesn't usually change, but in the relationships chosen in adulthood. In the friendships and partnerships where the person gets to, for the first time, find out what happens when they're not available. And what they find in healthy relationships is that the person they love is still there. And that finding, that the relationship survives their unavailability, is the most important piece of data the original environment never provided. Because the original environment couldn't provide it. In enmeshed or parentified family systems, the architecture genuinely does depend on the child's function. The absence of availability does, in those systems, produce real consequences. Tension, the withdrawal of warmth, the quiet pressure of a family that is organized around a role and feels the absence of the person who fills it. The experiment wasn't safe to run because the results would have confirmed what the nervous system predicted. Salvador Minichin's structural family therapy spent decades working with exactly these systems, understanding how roles become structural, how the family's equilibrium depends on specific members performing specific functions, and what happens when those functions are disrupted. In many cases, being unavailable inside the original architecture genuinely destabilized things. And the child who experimented with unavailability learned, from the genuine result, that availability was in fact the condition. But adult relationships, healthy ones, the ones worth building, have something the original environment did not. the capacity to absorb someone's absence without requiring it to be filled. A person who loves someone raised to be available doesn't need them to be on call every moment in order to remain. They can hold the space of not being served, not being attended to, and stay warm, present, without requiring function in order to sustain the connection. Murray Bowen called this differentiation. The people who model it, by staying when the function pauses, teach something the nervous system has never had evidence for, that you are worth staying for, even when you're not available. Here's something worth sitting with. If the people in your life saw you fall apart, really fall apart, what do you think would happen? Most people in this pattern have never tested that because they learned early that it wasn't safe to find out. I've written about that fear and what lives underneath it. Everything is linked in the description and in the first pinned comment. Now I want to ask you something directly. When you're unavailable, when you don't answer, when you take time that's genuinely yours, when you're unreachable by choice, what arrives in the body? Not the justification you give afterward. The immediate response. The feeling that moves through you in the first moments of being off duty. Is it relief? Or is it something that looks like relief, but has guilt underneath it? The particular kind of guilt that doesn't attach to anything you've actually done wrong. It just arrives, automatically, as the cost of being temporarily out of service. And then this, think about who you are when no one is asking anything of you. When there's no task, no need, no person to read or respond to or support. Just you and a quiet room with no function required. Do you know who that is? Not who you should be, or want to be, or are theoretically when you're at your best. Who you actually are, right now, with your current preferences and your current needs and your current sense of what you find genuinely pleasurable for no reason other than that it pleases you. If that question requires more time than it should, that's not a reflection of your depth or complexity. It's a reflection of how little time the environment gave you to practice answering it. You were raised to be available, and you have been, thoroughly, consistently, at significant personal cost. But you were also, underneath all of that, before any of the shaping happened, a person, with an interior, with preferences, with the right to occupy time and space that isn't in service of anything. That person didn't disappear when the role formed around them. They've just been waiting for a very long time for someone to finally ask. If something in this video found you today, leave a comment. Tell me what you do or what you've never been able to do when no one needs anything from you. I read everything. And subscribe if you haven't, because the final video in this series closes something that's been running underneath all of these conversations. The pattern that forms before any of the others. The one that made all of this make sense. That one matters.